The impulse to block an avoidant person after they've withdrawn feels righteous and necessary. It feels like taking control, establishing boundaries, protecting yourself from further hurt. Every article and advice column suggests blocking as the ultimate power move, the definitive way to show you've moved on and reclaim your dignity. But this advice fundamentally misunderstands how the avoidant mind operates and what actually triggers their return. Blocking creates finality that allows the avoidant person to construct whatever narrative serves them best about the relationship and its ending. It removes their ability to check on you, which removes the mechanism through which regret and reconsideration develop. It transforms you from a person who chose to withdraw your attention into someone who appears hurt, reactive, and still emotionally controlled by them. The avoidant person interprets blocking not as strength, but as confirmation that they had power over you, that they mattered enough to warrant such a dramatic response, that you couldn't handle their presence even in the distant digital sense. What actually works is far more subtle and psychologically sophisticated. It requires maintaining access while becoming completely inaccessible, allowing them to see you while demonstrating they no longer affect you, keeping the door technically open while making it clear you've walked so far away from it that whether they enter or not has become irrelevant to your life. Why blocking destroys your strategic position. Blocking an avoidant person feels powerful in the moment because it represents action after a period of feeling powerless. The relationship made you feel small, reactive, constantly adjusting yourself to their withdrawal and inconsistency. Blocking feels like reclaiming agency, like making a choice rather than being subjected to their choices. This emotional satisfaction is real, but short-lived, and it comes at significant strategic cost that most people don't recognize until it's too late. The cost isn't about playing games or manipulating the avoidant person into return. The cost is about how blocking affects the psychological dynamics that determine whether the avoidant person will ever reconsider their assessment of you and the relationship. The first problem with blocking is that it communicates continued emotional investment in the clearest possible terms. The avoidant person interprets blocking as evidence that you're still hurt, still angry, still thinking about them constantly. They understand that indifferent people don't block. People who have genuinely moved on don't need to create barriers because the other person's presence or absence doesn't register as significant enough to require action. Blocking reveals that you're not indifferent, that you're protecting yourself because you're vulnerable, that they still have power to affect your emotional state. This interpretation feeds directly into the avoidant person's narrative about the relationship and confirms their decision to leave. The narrative the avoidant person constructs after withdrawal typically centers on your emotional intensity and neediness being incompatible with their need for space and autonomy. They remember the relationship through the filter of feeling pressured, trapped, overwhelmed by your emotions. Blocking confirms every element of this narrative. It appears as another example of your emotional reactivity, another instance of you making their behavior about you, another demonstration that you couldn't handle the relationship's ending with grace or maturity. The avoidant person sees the block and thinks, often unconsciously, that they made the right choice in leaving someone so emotionally volatile and dependent. The second problem is that blocking eliminates the avoidant person's ability to observe you, which eliminates the primary mechanism through which their regret develops. Avoidant people don't sit with their feelings about relationship endings. They don't process loss through internal reflection. They avoid those uncomfortable emotional experiences the same way they avoid intimacy. Instead, their regret develops through external observation. They check on you periodically, curious about how you're doing, whether you're thinking about them, whether you've moved on. These check-ins are typically rationalized as casual curiosity or friendly concern, but they serve a deeper psychological function. They allow the avoidant person to maintain a sense of connection and importance without any of the vulnerability that actual relationship requires. When the avoidant person checks on you and discovers you've blocked them, several things happen simultaneously that work against the possibility of their return. First, they experience relief because the block removes any obligation or opportunity to engage. They can tell themselves they would have reached out or been friendly, but you blocked them, so there's nothing they can do. The responsibility shifts entirely to you. Second, they feel validated in their decision to leave because the block confirms you're still caught up in emotion while they've moved on rationally. Third, they lose all access to information about how you're doing, which prevents them from witnessing the growth and transformation that might challenge their narrative about you. The third problem with blocking is that it creates a binary state that limits options for both parties. Once you've blocked someone, any future contact requires the deliberate, obvious action of unblocking them. This action cannot be subtle or casual. It announces clearly that you were bothered enough to block and now have changed your mind. This announcement carries implications that make future interaction awkward and loaded with meaning. The avoidant person who discovers they've been unblocked understands that this required conscious choice on your part, which suggests continued preoccupation with them. The natural, organic possibilities for renewed contact that exist when blocking never happened are eliminated by the binary of blocked versus unblocked. The fourth problem relates to how blocking affects your own psychological process. Blocking feels like creating space and protecting yourself, but it often does the opposite. It keeps you focused on the avoidant person because you're aware that you've taken this dramatic action toward them. Every time you think about posting something, part of your mind notes that they can't see it because you blocked them. Every time you encounter something that might interest them, you remember they're blocked. The block itself becomes a form of connection, a constant reminder of their absence and your decision to enforce that absence. This mental occupation prevents genuine moving on because you're still organizing your behavior around their existence, just in negative space rather than positive. The psychological dynamic that actually creates conditions for avoidant return requires something different from blocking. It requires the avoidant person to have access to observe you while you demonstrate complete disinterest in whether they're observing or not. This dynamic communicates strength and indifference far more effectively than blocking ever could. It says that you're not hurt enough to need protection through blocking, not angry enough to make dramatic gestures, not interested enough in them to care whether they can see your life or not. This indifference, this genuine lack of concern about their access or awareness, penetrates the avoidant person's defenses in ways that blocking cannot. The avoidant person checking on someone who blocked them feels satisfied and validated. The avoidant person checking on someone who clearly isn't thinking about them at all feels disturbed and challenged. The first scenario confirms their narrative and their choice. The second scenario introduces doubt and cognitive dissonance that grows with each observation. The block allows them to construct whatever story serves them. The open access forces them to confront the reality that you've moved forward without them in ways that suggest blocking never even occurred to you because they don't matter enough to warrant it. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it reveals that the goal isn't to hurt the avoidant person or make them feel blocked out. The goal is to demonstrate such complete forward movement and indifference that blocking would be redundant. You don't block someone who no longer registers as relevant enough to block. You don't protect yourself from someone who can't hurt you because you've genuinely released emotional investment in them. This is the position that actually creates conditions for their return, not because you're trying to make them return, but because their system cannot tolerate being genuinely irrelevant to someone they once had power over. The power of strategic silence. With open, doors. The alternative to blocking is strategic silence, a state where all channels remain technically open, but you never initiate contact or respond with any enthusiasm or investment when the avoidant person reaches out. This silence is not passive or weak. It's deliberate and powerful, specifically because it maintains the possibility of contact while demonstrating you have no interest in that possibility. The open door that no one walks through communicates far more than the locked door ever could. It forces the avoidant person to confront their own choices and the consequences of those choices without the convenient excuse that you blocked them and prevented contact. Strategic silence begins with complete cessation of initiation from your side. No texts, no calls, no comments on their posts, no likes on their content, no messages through mutual friends. Nothing that could be interpreted as attempt to maintain connection or get their attention. This cessation must be absolute and permanent, not temporary withdrawal meant to provoke response. The silence communicates that you've withdrawn your attention and energy completely, that you're investing those resources elsewhere, that they no longer occupy space in your active awareness. This withdrawal is visible to the avoidant person precisely because the channels remain open and you're simply not using them. The avoidant person notices silence differently than they notice blocking. Blocking is obvious and immediate. They attempt to view your profile or send a message and discover they can't. The action is clear and the meaning is apparent. You've cut them off. Silence unfolds gradually. They notice you haven't liked their recent post. They notice you haven't viewed their stories. They notice that when they post something they know you'd normally comment on, your response is absent. These accumulating absences create different psychological effects than the single event of discovering they're blocked. The silence feels like you've moved on organically rather than dramatically, like you've simply lost interest rather than needing to protect yourself from them. This distinction matters because the avoidant person's ego processes these two scenarios differently. Being blocked triggers defensiveness and validation of their choice to leave. Being ignored triggers confusion and challenge to their self-narrative. They expected you to pursue, to be hurt, to need them. The silence suggests none of those expectations are being met. They expected to occupy significant space in your emotional life, even after leaving. The silence suggests they don't. This discrepancy between expectation and reality creates the cognitive dissonance that eventually drives them to reach out, to test whether the silence is real or strategic, to confirm whether they still matter to you or have actually become irrelevant. The power of strategic silence is amplified by what the avoidant person can observe through the open channels. They can see your life continuing. They can see you posting occasionally about activities, interests, experiences. They can see evidence of your social life, your growth, your forward movement. All of this information reaches them while they notice you never reach out to them, never reference them directly or indirectly, never show any sign that you're aware they're watching. This combination, visible thriving paired with complete absence of pursuit, creates the specific conditions that trigger avoidant return more reliably than any other approach. The avoidant person's response to strategic silence follows a predictable pattern. Initially, they feel relief. The silence confirms that they successfully ended the relationship, that you've accepted the ending, that they don't need to manage your emotions or respond to your pursuit. This relief phase can last days or weeks, depending on how quickly they move into other distractions or relationships. During this phase, they rarely check on you because they're satisfied that the situation is resolved and requires no further attention from them. The second phase begins when they do check on you, whether out of boredom or curiosity. or unconscious need to confirm you're still thinking about them. They discover that your life is continuing, that you're posting content, that you're clearly engaged with your life in ways that don't reference or include them. This discovery creates mild surprise because they expected evidence of pining or pain. They expected sad posts or obvious signs of missing them. Instead, they find normalcy or even improvement. This observation plants a small seed of doubt about their narrative, though they typically dismiss it in this early phase as you putting on a brave face. The third phase occurs with repeated checking over time. Each time they observe you, they notice the same pattern: continued forward movement, no evidence of distress, no attempts to contact them. The accumulation of these observations begins shifting their internal narrative. They start wondering if you've actually moved on, if you genuinely aren't thinking about them, if they mattered less to you than they assumed. These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten the avoidant person's self-image. They need to believe they had significant impact, that people don't just move on from them easily, that they're memorable and important. Your silence challenges all of these beliefs. The fourth phase is when they reach out tentatively. This typically comes in the form of low-stakes contact, liking something you posted weeks ago, commenting something innocuous, sending a casual message about a shared memory or mutual interest. This reach out is carefully calibrated to seem natural and friendly while serving a deeper purpose, testing whether you're still emotionally available to them, whether the silence is genuine or strategic, whether they still have access to your attention and emotion. Your response to this test determines everything that follows. The power of strategic silence is maintained through your response or lack thereof to these reach-outs. If you respond with enthusiasm or extend the conversation beyond minimal politeness, their system immediately registers that the silence was strategic rather than genuine, that you're still invested, that they still have power. The doubt that was building dissolves, and they retreat to their comfortable position of knowing you're still emotionally available if they want you. But if you respond minimally, with the same energy you'd give any casual acquaintance, or don't respond at all, their doubt intensifies into something more urgent. Your minimal response communicates that the silence was genuine, that you're not ignoring them out of hurt or strategy, but out of authentic lack of interest in maintaining connection. This communication is devastating to the avoidant person's ego in ways blocking never achieves. Blocking says you're protecting yourself from hurt. Minimal response says there's nothing to protect yourself from, because you're not emotionally invested enough to be hurt. The avoidant person experiences this distinction viscerally, and it activates their pursuit system in ways that blocking completely prevents. What they see when they check on you. The content the avoidant person encounters when they check on you through the open channels determines whether their mild curiosity transforms into genuine reconsideration. What they see must tell a specific story, that your life has not only continued, but improved without them, that you're investing in yourself and your growth, that you're surrounded by people and opportunities, that whatever loss you might have felt has been transformed into positive momentum. This story cannot be performed or constructed specifically for their viewing. It must be genuine evidence of actual forward movement, because the avoidant person's sophisticated detection system will identify inauthenticity immediately. The first element they need to see is consistency in your forward movement. Occasional posts or sporadic activity suggest you're struggling and putting on appearances. Regular, steady content about your life suggests genuine engagement with your life. This consistency doesn't mean constant posting or oversharing. It means that when they check on you, regardless of when that check happens, they find evidence that you're living fully. They see you pursuing interests, spending time with friends, engaging with hobbies, developing skills. The consistency communicates that this is your real life now, not performance for any audience, including them. The second element is evidence of growth and transformation. The avoidant person needs to see that you're different from who you were during the relationship, that you've used the ending as catalyst for positive change. This might appear as new skills you're learning, physical transformation through fitness or style, or changes, professional advancement, creative projects you're pursuing. The specific content matters less than the pattern it reveals. You took the pain or disappointment of the relationship ending and converted it into fuel for becoming a better version of yourself. This transformation challenges the avoidant person's narrative that you were the problem in the relationship. The third element is visible happiness and contentment. The avoidant person expected to see sadness, longing, or struggle. Instead, they need to encounter genuine joy. Photos where you're smiling authentically. Content about experiences you're enjoying. Expression of gratitude or excitement about aspects of your life. This happiness cannot be defiant or obviously constructed to prove something. It must be organic expression of actual contentment. The avoidant person seeing you genuinely happy without them creates specific psychological discomfort because it suggests they weren't as essential to your well-being as they assumed. The fourth element, and perhaps most triggering for the avoidant person, is evidence of attention from others. This doesn't mean posting about dates or new relationships, which can appear desperate or retaliatory. It means more subtle evidence, comments from others on your posts, tags in group activities, mentions that suggest active social life and people vying for your time and attention. The avoidant person needs to perceive that you're not isolated and pining, but surrounded and engaged. This perception triggers their competitive instincts and fear that someone else will recognize and claim your value. The fifth element is complete absence of any reference to them or the relationship. No sad posts about heartbreak, no vague quotes about being hurt or learning to trust again, no obvious gaps where they used to appear in your life. Your content should reflect a life where they simply don't exist, where the chapter they represented has closed so completely that it doesn't warrant reference even in negative space. This absence is more powerful than any direct communication about moving on could be. It says that they've become so irrelevant that you don't think about them enough to reference them, even obliquely. The cumulative effect of these elements creates a narrative the avoidant person cannot ignore or explain away. Each individual observation might be dismissed. Maybe that happiness is fake, maybe that growth is temporary, maybe that social activity is compensation for missing them. But the accumulation of evidence over time, the consistency of the pattern, the obvious authenticity of your forward movement, all of this creates cognitive dissonance that grows rather than resolves. The avoidant person finds themselves thinking about you more, not less, as time passes. They find themselves checking on you more frequently, trying to find cracks in the facade, looking for evidence that underneath the apparent thriving, you're still affected by them. When they don't find that evidence, when every check reveals the same story of genuine forward movement and authentic happiness, something shifts in their psychology. You transform from someone they left into someone who left them behind. You shift from the pursuer to the pursued, from the needy one to the one who moved on, from the problem in the relationship to the one who improved after its ending. This transformation is visible through their observations and contradicts everything they told themselves about the relationship and its ending. The contradiction becomes unbearable. The avoidant person begins experiencing something unfamiliar, genuine loss. Not the theoretical loss they might have acknowledged when first ending things, but visceral recognition that someone valuable has moved beyond their reach. This recognition doesn't come from you telling them they lost something valuable. It comes from them observing evidence that forces them to this conclusion themselves. What they see when they check on you tells a story their ego cannot accept, that you're better off without them, that their departure benefited you rather than harmed you, that they might have been the problem rather than you. This realization drives them toward reaching out with more serious intent than casual check-ins. They need to disrupt the narrative they're observing. They need to confirm they still matter, that they could still have you if they wanted. They need to test whether the forward movement is real or whether you're still emotionally available to them underneath the appearance of having moved on. This need intensifies with each observation because your continued thriving without any attempt to contact them or draw them back becomes increasingly difficult to explain away through their usual defensive narratives. The exact timeline that brings them back. Understanding the timeline of avoidant return is crucial because it prevents premature action that disrupts the process. The timeline varies based on individual factors, but the phases follow predictable patterns that remain consistent across most avoidant individuals. Knowing these phases allows you to maintain strategic silence and appropriate behavior at each stage, rather than misinterpreting the avoidant person's lack of contact as evidence the approach isn't working. The timeline requires patience that feels excruciating, but premature breaking of silence or blocking them in frustration resets the entire process. The first phase, lasting approximately 2 to 4 weeks after you implement strategic silence, is characterized by the avoidant person's relief and minimal contact. They're satisfied that the relationship ended, pleased that you're not pursuing them, comfortable in their decision. During this phase, they rarely check on you because they're either distracted by other things or confident that you're grieving and missing them. This phase requires maintaining complete silence, despite the temptation to reach out or the fear that silence isn't working. The avoidant person's lack of response during this phase is expected and necessary. They need this time to settle into their usual post-relationship pattern before anything can disrupt it. The second phase, typically occurring between weeks 4 and 8, marks the first shift. The avoidant person experiences some trigger that makes them think of you: a song, a place, a memory, or simply boredom. They decide to check on you casually, expecting to find evidence of missing them or struggling. Instead, they discover the first signs of your forward movement. This discovery creates mild surprise and brief reconsideration that quickly gets rationalized away. They tell themselves you're putting on a brave face, or that it's too soon to judge whether you've actually moved on. During this phase, you might notice them viewing your stories or liking something you posted. Your response must remain non-existent or completely minimal. The third phase, occurring roughly between weeks 8 and 16, involves increased checking behavior from the avoidant person. Their curiosity intensifies as they notice the consistency of your forward movement. They check more frequently, looking for cracks in your apparent thriving, trying to find evidence that supports their narrative about you being needy or unable to function well without them. Each check reveals the opposite. You're consistently engaged with your life, consistently happy, consistently moving forward. This phase is when the cognitive dissonance really begins building. The avoidant person starts having more frequent thoughts about you because what they're observing doesn't match their expectations or narrative. During this third phase, you're likely to receive your first tentative reach out from them. This comes as casual message or comment, carefully constructed to seem innocent while testing whether you're still emotionally available. The content is usually neutral, asking how you've been, mentioning something that reminded them of you, commenting on something you posted. Your response determines whether the process continues or resets. Responding with enthusiasm or extended conversation tells them the silence was strategic and you're still invested. This stops the process immediately. They retreat to comfortable distance satisfied that they still have access to you. But minimal response or no response at all intensifies their doubt and drives the process forward. The fourth phase, typically between weeks 16 and 24, is when the avoidant person's reconsideration becomes serious. The accumulation of observations has created significant doubt about their narrative. They're thinking about you regularly now, not just when randomly triggered. They're actively checking on you, looking for any sign that you're thinking about them or that the thriving is performance. They find no such evidence. Instead, they might discover during this phase that you're dating someone new or receiving significant attention from others. This discovery creates urgency that was absent before. Suddenly, you're not just someone who moved on, but someone who might become unavailable to them permanently. During phase 4, the avoidant person's reach-outs become more frequent and more direct. They're no longer sending casual, deniable messages. They're expressing that they've been thinking about you, that they miss aspects of the relationship, that they wonder how you're doing. These messages reveal their growing discomfort with your silence and apparent indifference. They're trying to provoke response that reassures them they still matter to you. Your continued minimal response or silence during this phase is crucial but extraordinarily difficult to maintain. You're receiving the attention you once desperately wanted, and every instinct pushes you to respond warmly. But warm response at this stage resets the dynamic back to the beginning. The fifth phase, occurring after approximately 6 months of maintained strategic silence and forward movement, is when the avoidant person typically makes their most serious attempt at reconnection. They've exhausted their ability to rationalize your silence and forward movement. They've sat with discomfort long enough that their defenses have weakened. They've recognized, consciously or unconsciously, that they lost something valuable and might not be able to reclaim it. This phase is characterized by more vulnerable communication from them, admissions of making mistakes, expressions of regret, requests to talk seriously about what happened and whether there's possibility of trying again. This fifth phase presents the critical decision point. The avoidant person has returned, just as the strategic silence and open channels were, designed to facilitate. They're showing up with more apparent emotional availability and vulnerability than they demonstrated during the relationship. This feels like victory, like validation that you were valuable all along, like proof that the approach worked. But this moment requires clear evaluation of what's actually happened and what it means for future possibility. The avoidant person's return was triggered by specific conditions: your absence, your thriving without them, your indifference to whether they returned. These conditions cannot be maintained within an actual relationship. The timeline demonstrates that avoidant return, when it happens, typically takes minimum of 4 to 6 months of maintained strategic silence and genuine forward movement. Shorter timelines are possible, but less common and usually less stable. The extended timeline is necessary because the avoidant person needs that much time and repeated observation to overcome their defenses and actually reconsider their narrative. Attempting to accelerate the timeline through breaking silence or through blocking them in frustration prevents the process from completing. The timeline requires patience that most people cannot maintain, which is why most people block early and prevent the return from ever happening. Understanding this timeline reveals something important. The conditions that bring the avoidant person back require you to spend months building a genuinely fulfilling life without them. By the time they return, which happens if it happens around the 6-month mark or later, you've typically transformed enough that their return carries different weight than it would have immediately after the ending. You've built new connections, pursued new interests, developed new sense of self that doesn't depend on their validation. The strategic silence and open channels were maintained not to manipulate them into return, but because you were genuinely focused elsewhere. This transformation is what makes their return less significant than it would have been earlier. And this decreased significance is what actually makes healthy reconnection possible if you choose to explore it. The timeline that brings them back is the same timeline that frees you from needing them back, which means by the time they return, you're finally in position to evaluate them clearly rather than desperately, to choose them consciously rather than need them compulsively, to maintain the standards and boundaries that made you attractive to them in the first place.